best playground. Hooray!
The Celebrity Jobber Podcast with Jeff Zito. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, give a 5-star rating, and leave a review. Check out all our past episodes on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you pod. What if these celebrities weren't famous? What would they have become? What was their first job? We're about to find out.
Our next guest you've seen doing comedy, stand-up, and on sitcoms for the last 30 plus years. She uses being an Asian American a lot in her comedy. And she had a rough life. Growing up, she was abused, and she has overcome a lot of adversity and has a great story to tell. My guest this week on Celebrity Jobber, comedian Margaret Cho. Hey, Margaret.
Hi there.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Pretty good. I know you can't talk about upcoming stuff because of the writer's strike. I've been told this by a lot of people. Are they at least close, do you think, to resolving it?
I don't know, but we're definitely out there striking, picketing. It's been a process. It's been very difficult. And I think what we're asking for isn't really that unreasonable. And, it's just... It's an interesting time, but we'll see. We're definitely still on strike, so I don't know.
Okay. Well, let's talk a little bit. We've never spoke before, so I'm excited to talk to you. And San Francisco, you grew up there. Comedy always your thing? You always wanted to be a comedian? Yes.
I've always wanted to be a comedian. I was very early on. I was a musician, and then when I was 5, I was fired because I kept waving at my mother behind the TV cameras when I was recording music on TV. I was singing. And so I started doing comedy when I was 14, and I'm still doing it. And so it's been 40 years. So, yes.
So show business, did you say 5 years old? Were you like actually getting paid?
Well, I got fired, so I must have got paid something.
Yeah.
I got hired in it was a vocal children's group, and we were on a television show called Asia Now.
Okay.
And it was in San Francisco. And, I kept waving to my mom behind the camera, and I was not reliable. As a child star, you can't wave at your mom if you're a child star. So it wasn't appropriate. So I opted instead to be a teen star.
Wow. Well, do you think that was your first job? Was that your very first paying gig of your life?
Yes.
Okay.
As a 5-year-old, yes.
As a 5-year-old, because I did see something interesting as a 15-year-old. You were a phone sex operator. I thought that was fun.
Yes.
That was
an interesting job too, because it wasn't talking to people. I was recording like very elaborate lines of dialogue to be played on a phone for sexual purposes, I guess.
Okay.
But it was for people to learn English while also calling a phone sex line.
Okay.
It's called Hot Girls USA.
Okay.
And it was very. I had the job actually for quite a long time. For that era in the 80s. So absolutely inappropriate, but taught me a lot about audio recording and also working in a soundproof booth or a recording studio.
Right.
So that sort of set me up for success later.
Was it a good paying gig, Margaret?
Not bad.
Okay.
It was $100 for every phone sort of monologue session. And you would get paid also more if you would write the copy before you went in there.
Oh, my gosh.
So, yeah.
Can you give me a contact? I mean, that sounds like great money today.
It was pretty good.
Not bad at all. Margaret, tell me a little bit about growing up in San Fran and your parents and what they did.
My parents owned a gay bookstore in San Francisco in the 70s. And so I was around gay people, drag queens, all sorts of gay political people very early in life. Lots of tattooed people who influenced my elaborate tattoos later. So, yeah, I was very lucky and grew up in the sort of very perfect kind of era. Of course, that didn't last long because we had to deal with the AIDS crisis, which really decimated the entire community of San Francisco. and, taught me a lot about pandemics and learning how to survive them. So, it prepared, I think, a lot of us for what was to come in 2020.
Were they supportive for, you wanting to go into the world of comedy, being, hard workers, owning a store? Did they give you their blessing?
Yeah, well, they didn't really understand what it was because they don't have, there's no real equivalent to stand-up comedy in Korea. I mean, there is now, but back then they just really didn't understand the art form or the possibility for me being in that world. So they didn't get it. But I was successful early enough where they were very pleased and proud, and were not worried about it much more like after that.
Well, tell me about high school. You were expelled from high school. Then you got into a performing arts high school, and that's where you kind of got serious about becoming a comedian, an actress.
Yes.
And how was that experience as far as giving you, the experience to, go to the next level? Because you had you attended that school. It's some pretty, famous people, I'd say, right?
Yes. And so our teacher would sign us up for open mic nights, and my first performances were with the comedy duo. I had a partner, and it was Sam Rockwell.
Wow.
Who is a very, very renowned Academy Award-winning actor, great guy. He doesn't do stand-up comedy anymore. He should. He's a really funny person. But that was, one of my first performances was doing shows with him.
So what about college? You go from the performing arts high school, you graduate, you go to college, and then you're acting in college as well? What was your major?
No, I didn't go to college.
Oh, you didn't?
I did take a couple of out of the curriculum, just like a couple of classes here and there, but I never attended college. I was on the road doing college shows for most of the time that I should have been in college.
Okay, so
which,
you did
was my education.
You went straight on right after high school, then went on the road and started doing stand up.
Yes, and so and I've been on the road ever since. I still do it, and so yeah.
What about a backup plan? Was there ever one?
No, there wasn't time. That's where I was really lucky, is that I was able to work really quickly and make a living probably by the time I was about 18. So, and appearing consistently on television until, like when I was 18, 19, I did the Bob Hope special, young comedian specials, where they would have, Bob Hope would pick these comedians, and they would do these shows every Christmas around that time. So I did 2 of them on 2 consecutive years, and then I was on shows like MTV's Half Hour Comedy Hour and Evening at the Improv. There's comedy spots. Dennis Miller had a talk show in the early 90s, and I did that a couple of times, which was really incredible. So, and then later The Tonight Show and David Letterman and all of those. So I was really lucky in that era to appear a lot.
Well, what do you consider your big break, Margaret? Because I first became aware of you with that show, All American Girl. That was when I first became familiar with Margaret Cho. Was that your big break, you think?
Yes, absolutely. Being on a network show, at that time there was only 3 networks, and Fox was just starting. So that gave me a lot of leverage. It still does. It's the first Asian American show to feature an all-Asian cast. It's a very, very big deal at the time in 1994. And the show was only around for 1 season, but it was very important for the time.
I'm like I can't believe it only lasted 1 season. To me, it seemed like it lasted a while.
Yeah, I think because then television was such a different thing, when you're considering how many people watch, and when you're like on a network for an entire year, it's a big deal. And so we had a lot of difficulty really convincing people that we should stay. I wish that we had, but it was a lot of people's first time seeing Asian Americans on TV, seeing Asians on TV. It's a big thing.
I'm just so mesmerized by, how I talk to people and there's no backup plan at all. It's like, didn't have time to think of one. And it was just like, boots on the ground and go forward. Did you just like kind of fake it till you make it? I mean, I know you got experience with the Performing Arts High School, but like, how did you do it?
Well, I had a million other jobs. It wasn't a backup plan per se, but I had a million like other little things. I was a Hello Kitty.
Oh.
I got in the fursuit, and I was a Hello Kitty at FAO Schwartz. I was like a lot of the different characters that you see like in FAO Schwartz at the time. Was a big toy store. So that was one job. I worked to make leather sex toys at a place that was very cool. So I did that. I did, a million different things. Worked at a million bookstores, worked at a lot of different places. And then, fortunately, I was able to make a living from my comedy fairly early. So that was good. But, no backup plan, but a lot of little jobs.
Unbelievable. Well, it's a great story. And she's had an incredibly difficult life, and it's a great story. I mean, it really is. On tour, live and livid. She's touring everywhere. You can go to Margaret's website, which I believe is margaretcho.com. The Margaret Cho is the podcast, or I should probably say The Margaret Cho. Will that be how you pronounce the podcast, Margaret? I love that.
Why not?
I love that. I think that's great. Are you making money on your podcast?
No. That's the one. I mean, yes and no. Of course, always. But yes and no. And with a little bit of like time not recording now because I'm on tour, so it's a little bit of a break. But it's all part of the same art project, which is my work in general.
An extension of your brand, and so I can't ask you what's next or what's coming up, but we'll wait till that strike's over, and hopefully we'll have you on again and talk to you a little bit more.
Wonderful, thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I kind of found a similarity growing up like Margaret did. Okay, so she grew up in San Francisco, was, very liberal part of the country at the time. Her parents owned a gay bookstore, and it was maybe the community, the customers that they have. Maybe she learned a lot about the world at a young age. And I always look at it. I came from a kind of a sheltered environment. And we moved to Sarasota, Florida. My very first paying job, was at a dinner theater. And I was not surrounded by many people, let's say the LGBTQ plus community. I didn't know any gay people personally at the time. So when I was 15 or 16, and I got the job at the dinner theater, I was exposed to a lot of that. And I learned a lot from having that job. And I kind of feel like a certain kinship with Margaret, growing up in San Francisco, her mother and father owning that gay bookstore, and maybe just being exposed to different things at an early age kind of just, kind of makes you who you are and shapes you a little bit. So her parents, again, owned a gay bookstore in San Francisco. Margaret had a ton of jobs. She was talking about being a Hello Kitty at FAO Schwartz. She talked about her first job. She was 5 years old and sang professionally in a group. She got fired for it because she kept, I guess, waving and pointing at her mother and family who were watching her in the audience. But the job that I thought was interesting was a phone sex operator. That's pretty cool. I mean, I don't know many people that were a phone sex operator in their lifetime. At least nobody's admitted it to me. So pretty good money in the 80s, I'd say $100 every time she talked dirty. Wow, I wonder what inflation has brought that number up to today. I would be interested in it. Her big break, of course, was the sitcom All-American Girl. That happened around 1994, and I'm kind of surprised to see that only lasted one season, because I remember it, and I thought it went on more than that. Maybe another big break that we didn't talk about was how she secured a spot opening for Jerry Seinfeld. She was also featured on a Bob Hope special, a frequent visitor to the Arsenio Hall show, and then, of course, All American Girl around the same time on ABC. So I'm not sure the chronology of those events, but it seemed like 1994 was a really big time of Margaret Cho's life. Her podcast, The Margaret Cho, and she's touring the country with her Live and Livid tour. Starts in September in Chico, California. She hits St. Paul, Minnesota, St. Louis, Nashville, Cleveland, Red Bank, New Jersey, San Antonio, New Orleans, Detroit, Chicago. More info is up on margaretcho.com. So, as you know, the writers' strike and SAG-AFTRA on strike. Can't really talk too much about what's coming up for Margaret, but I'm sure some big things. Very funny and very talented. Thanks for listening. Please subscribe. And if you like the podcast, I appreciate a 5-star rating. Leave a review. Past episodes at celebrityjobber.com. You can follow us on IG at Celebrity Jobber Podcast. And we're coming up on our 1-year anniversary here pretty soon. Can you believe it? I know I can't. Thanks to everybody who has supported thus far. Until next week, this has been another exciting episode of the Celebrity Jobber Podcast. Thanks again. I'm Jeff Zito.